My 33-year-old sister lost her job yesterday because I refused to be her unpaid childcare anymore. She quit after I told her I would disappear again if she forced me to babysit her 3-month-old baby while she worked. The family is treating me like a selfish monster who destroyed a new mother's career out of pure laziness. But they do not know what it is really like to be a 14-year-old girl, forced to raise someone else's baby while battling insomnia and panic attacks. They do not know about the sleepless nights spent watching a newborn breathe, terrified that something would happen on my watch. They do not know about the paranoia that consumed me every time the baby coughed or slept too soundly. My sister moved back home after her boyfriend abandoned her during pregnancy. Instead of finding real childcare solutions, my parents decided their teenage daughter would make the perfect free babysitter. No experience necessary. No training required. Just throw a 14-year-old into the deep end with a helpless infant and hope for the best. The night I snuck out to my friend's house, I finally got my first full night of sleep in weeks. I woke up to 17 missed calls and text messages calling me selfish and irresponsible. My sister was screaming. My mother was threatening punishment. My father was the only one who seemed to understand that maybe, just maybe, forcing a child to raise another child is not sustainable. Now my sister is unemployed. My family barely bear. Speaks to me, and I am the villain in a story where I was actually the victim. But for the first time in months, I can sleep without listening for crying in the next room. The most devastating part was realizing that my family saw my mental health crisis as laziness. They watched me deteriorate under impossible responsibility and decided I just needed to try harder instead of questioning whether their solution was destroying their other child. 3 months ago, my sister Sarah came home with the newborn baby, and no plan beyond family will help. The father had disappeared the moment he found out about the pregnancy, leaving my sister to navigate single motherhood with our parents as her only support system. What nobody anticipated was how quickly that support would become my responsibility. My parents both work night shifts at the same company. They are exhausted when they get home at 6 in the morning, needing rest before their next shift starts at 11 that night. My sister had been unemployed since quitting her job in the 8th month of pregnancy. The math was simple in their minds. Sarah needs to work, parents need to sleep. 14-year-old daughter is home for summer break. Perfect solution, right? What they did not factor in was that I have zero experience with babies. I had never changed a diaper, never prepared formula, never dealt with a crying infant who would not stop screaming. They handed me a 3-month-old human being and expected me to figure it out through trial and error while they got the rest they needed. But the real problem was not my inexperience. It was my mental health. I've struggled with insomnia since I was 12. On a good night, I get maybe 4 hours of sleep. Add the responsibility of keeping a baby alive, and sleep became completely impossible. I would lie awake for hours listening to every sound from the nursery, convinced that the moment I fell asleep would be the moment something terrible happened. Every cough made my heart race. Dear. Every time she slept too quietly, I would creep into her room to make sure she was still breathing. I became obsessed with the idea that if something happened to my niece while I was watching her, it would be my fault. The weight of that responsibility was crushing me slowly. But my family saw my exhaustion as laziness. They saw my panic as overdramatics. When I tried to explain how overwhelmed I felt, my mother told me to deal with it because family helps family. When I suggested daycare, they looked at me like I had suggested abandoning the baby in a dumpster. The breaking point came during my 3rd week of baby duty. I had been awake for 36 hours straight, too anxious to sleep, too paranoid to relax. My sister came home from her new job at a retail store, took one look at me holding her sleeping daughter, and complained that I looked tired. "You literally just sit around all day," she said, her voice dripping with dismissive irritation. How hard could it be? That was what. And I realized they truly had no idea what they were doing to me. They saw free babysitting. I was drowning in responsibility I never asked for and was not equipped to handle. They saw family helping family. I saw my mental health deteriorating in real time, while adults who should have known better used me as a solution to their childcare problem. The sleep deprivation was making me paranoid and anxious in ways I had never experienced before. I started having panic attacks when the baby cried too. Long way. I would hyperventilate when she would not eat. I was convinced that every normal baby behavior was a sign that something was wrong, and that I was failing to keep her safe. But when I tried to communicate these feelings to my family, they interpreted them as complaints about helping out instead of genuine distress signals from a child who was being asked to handle adult responsibilities without adult support. The most infuriating part was how my sister acted like her job at a retail store was more important than my summer vacation, my sleep, my mental health, or my childhood. She would come home and criticize how I had spent my day watching her child, as if I was being paid to provide childcare services instead of being forced into unpaid labor. She never thanked me. She never acknowledged that I was sacrificing my entire summer break to make her life possible. She never recognized that watching a baby for 10 hours a day was exhausting work, not relaxing leisure time. Instead, he treated me like hired help who was not performing up to her standards. She would come home and immediately start checking on things I had done wrong, criticizing my diaper changing technique, questioning my feeding schedule decisions, making me feel incompetent and resentful. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to save myself, even if it meant disappointing everyone who claimed to love me, but was perfectly willing to sacrifice my well-being for their convenience. The plan was not elaborate or calculated. It was born from pure desperation and executed with the impulsiveness of a 14-year-old who had reached her absolute breaking point. I did not set out to destroy my sister's career. I set out to save my own sanity from adults who were slowly killing me with impossible expectations. The night before my great escape, I watched my sister get ready for work with a mixture of resentment and complete exhaustion. She applied makeup, chose her outfit, packed her lunch, all while I sat in the corner holding her baby and fighting to keep my eyes open. The contrast was stark. She was preparing for adult life and independence, while I was trapped in a cycle of unpaid labor that was slowly destroying my mental health. As she kissed the baby goodbye and headed for the door, she casually mentioned that she might work late to make a good impression on her new manager. No discussion about how this would affect my day. No acknowledgement that I had been caring for her child for weeks without a break. Just the assumption that I would continue to sacrifice my summer vacation for her convenience. That was when something inside me snapped with crystalline clarity. I waited until I heard her car pull out of the driveway. I waited until my parents left for their night shift at 10:30. I waited until the house was completely silent, except for the baby's soft breathing from her crib. Then I wrote a note explaining that I had gone to a friend's house and would be back the next morning. I turned off my phone and walked out the door. The feeling of freedom was intoxicating. For the first time in weeks, I was not listening for crying. I was not checking on breathing patterns. I was not calculating feeding schedules or diaper changes. I was just a 14-year-old girl walking to her friend's house at 10 o'clock at night, feeling lighter with every step I took away from that suffocating responsibility. At my friend's house, I collapsed onto her seat. Ouch, and slept for 12 straight hours. Real sleep. Deep, uninterrupted, peaceful sleep that I had not experienced since my sister moved home. I woke up feeling human again, feeling like myself again, remembering what it felt like to exist without constant anxiety about keeping another human being alive. But the reckoning was waiting for me on my phone. 17 missed calls. 43 text messages. Voicemails that started concerned and quickly escalated to furious. My sister had come home from work to find no babysitter and a baby alone in her crib. My parents had received panicked calls while they were at work. The whole family was in crisis mode because their unpaid childcare solution had finally said no. Walking back into that house was like walking into a war zone. My sister was pacing the living room, having called in sick to work after finding the baby alone. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. The air was thick with accusations and disappointment. How could you be so selfish? My sister demanded the moment I walked through the door. She could have died. Anything could have happened. Where were you? My mother added, her voice sharp with anger and worry. We trusted you. But here's the thing about reaching your breaking point. Suddenly, you find words you did not know you had. I am 14 years old, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I did not choose to have a baby. I did not choose to become a single mother. I did not choose any of this, but you are acting like it is my responsibility to fix your problems. The room went silent. My sister's mouth fell open. My mother looked shocked that I was talking back instead of apologizing. I have insomnia, I continued, gaining momentum as weeks of suppressed frustration poured out. I have not slept properly in weeks because I am terrified something will happen to her while I am watching her. I am a child taking care of a child, and you are mad at me for finally admitting I can't handle it. My sister started to argue, but I was not finished. You want to work? Figure out real childcare. You want me to help sometimes? Ask, do not demand. You want to treat me like an adult with adult responsibilities? Then treat me like an adult when I tell you I am overwhelmed. The conversation that followed was explosive. My sister accused me of ruining her life. My mother accused me of being selfish and irresponsible. But underneath their anger, I could see something else. The dawning realization that they had been asking too much of me. My father, who had been silent during most of the confrontation, finally spoke up. She's right, he said quietly. We have been asking too much of her. She is just a kid. His support gave me the courage to deliver the final blow that would end my sister's career. If you force me to babysit again, I said, looking directly at my sister, I will leave again. And next time I will not come back until you find a real solution. It was not a threat. It was a boundary. The first real boundary I had ever set with my family, and the most important one I had ever needed to set. My sister stared at me for a long moment, processing the implications. She could force me to babysit, but she could not force me to stay. She could guilt me into compliance, but she could not guilt me into accepting responsibility for her choices. She could make me the villain, but she could not make me the solution to her problems. The next morning, she called her employer and quit her job. The family blamed me for destroying her career prospects. They blamed me for being selfish and dramatic. They blamed me for not understanding how hard things were for everyone. But what they could not do was force me back into that role of unpaid, untrained, overwhelmed childcare. Because sometimes the only way to save yourself is to let other people face the consequences of their own choices. Sometimes the only way to stop enabling dysfunction is to remove yourself from the equation entirely. And sometimes the bravest thing a 14-year-old can do is refuse to sacrifice her childhood for someone else's convenience. The aftermath was immediate and educational. Without me as their go-to childcare solution, my parents had to confront the reality of what they had been asking of me. They started researching actual daycare options, talking about budgeting for professional childcare, discussing realistic solutions that did not involve exploiting their teenage daughter. My sister spent the first week unemployed and angry, making passive-aggressive comments about how I had ruined her chances of financial independence. But as the days passed and she was forced to care for her own child full-time, I watched her begin to understand what I had been dealing with for weeks. The constant vigilance, the sleep deprivation, the anxiety about making mistakes, the overwhelming responsibility of keeping another human being alive and healthy. She started to realize that what he had been calling sitting around all day was actually exhausting. Stressful work that required constant attention and energy. After 2 weeks of full-time baby care, she quietly apologized for dismissing my struggles. She admitted that she had not understood how hard it was until she had to do it herself without backup. She said she was sorry for taking my help for granted and treating me like hired help instead of family who was making sacrifices for her. The apology was meaningful, but it so confirmed what I had suspected. They had known all along that what they were asking of me was difficult and unfair. They had just chosen to ignore that reality because my suffering was more convenient than finding adult solutions to adult problems. My sister has been unemployed for 2 weeks now, and the family dynamics have shifted dramatically. Without me as their go-to childcare solution, my parents have had to confront the reality of what they were asking of me. They have started researching actual daycare options, talking about budgeting for professional childcare, discussing realistic solutions that do not involve exploiting their teenage daughter. My sister is still struggling financially, but there is something different in how she talks about childcare now. She understands that watching a baby is real work that requires real compensation, not just family obligation that can be demanded without consideration for the caregiver's well-being. The most interesting change has been in my relationship with my father. He has been quietly supportive throughout this whole ordeal, and last week he pulled me aside to apologize. He said he had not realized how much pressure they were putting on me, how unfair the situation had become. He said he was proud of me for standing up for myself, even though it was difficult for everyone. My mental health has improved dramatically since setting this boundary. I am sleeping better, feeling less anxious, and slowly remembering what it feels like to be a teenager instead of an unpaid nanny. I still love my niece, and I still help with her care sometimes, but now it is voluntary rather than mandatory. Now it is helping family instead of being exploited by family. But the most important lesson I have learned from this experience is about the difference between selfishness and self-preservation. For weeks, I let them convince me that my exhaustion was laziness, that my overwhelm was immaturity, that my boundaries were selfishness. I let them reframe my legitimate needs as character flaws. The truth is, protecting your mental health is not selfish. Refusing to take responsibility for other people's choices is not selfish. Setting boundaries when you are being exploited is not selfish. Sometimes what looks like selfishness to other people is actually survival to the person setting the boundary. I have gotten messages from other teenagers who are dealing with similar situations. Kids who are expected to raise their siblings while their parents work. Kids who are told that family always comes first, even when that family is asking them to sacrifice their childhood, their education, their mental health for someone else's convenience. The response from extended family has been mixed. Some relatives have supported my decision to prioritize my own well-being. Others have criticized me for not being more understanding about how hard things are for my sister as a single mother. But what these critics do not understand is that my sister's difficult situation does not obligate me to sacrifice my own well-being to solve her problems. Being related to someone who is struggling does not mean you are responsible for fixing their struggles, especially when you are a child yourself. The most validating response came from my school counselor, who told me that what my family was doing constituted a form of parentification, which is considered emotional abuse. She explained that children should not be given adult responsibilities that interfere with their own development and well-being. She also helped me understand that my anxiety and sleep problems were normal responses to being given responsibility that was beyond my developmental capacity. She said that 14-year-olds are not equipped to handle the stress of being responsible for infant care, and that my mental health symptoms were my body's way of telling me that the situation was unhealthy. This professional validation was incredibly important because it confirmed that my feelings were legitimate and my boundaries were necessary, not selfish or dramatic. I have also learned important lessons about family dynamics and emotional manipulation. When I set my boundary about not providing free childcare anymore, my family's response revealed their true priorities. Instead of being concerned about why their 14-year-old was having mental health problems, they were angry that their free labor was no longer available. Instead of questioning whether they were asking too much of a child, they questioned whether I was being grateful enough for the privilege of helping family. Instead of finding adult solutions to adult problems, they tried to guilt me back into accepting responsibility that was never mine to carry. The experience taught me that some people will call you selfish for refusing to sacrifice yourself for their convenience. Some people will call you dramatic for having normal responses to abnormal situations. Some people will call you ungrateful for setting boundaries with people who are exploiting your willingness to help. Learning to ignore these manipulative labels and trust my own feelings about what is reasonable and fair has been one of the most important skills I have developed from this experience. If you are in that situation right now, if you are being told that your needs do not matter because family needs help, if you are being expected to solve adult problems with child-level resources, you have the right to say no. You have the right to protect yourself. You have the right to be a child instead of an unpaid employee in your own family. Setting boundaries is not betrayal. It is survival. And sometimes survival looks selfish to people who are benefiting from your sacrifice. The baby is healthy and happy. My sister is learning to be a real single mother instead of someone who delegates childcare to children. My parents are learning that family help should be voluntary and reasonable, not mandatory and exploitative. And I am learning what it feels like to be 14 again, to sleep through the night, to have anxiety that is normal teenager anxiety instead of impossible responsibility anxiety. Sometimes destroying someone's plan is the only way to save yourself from being destroyed by that plan. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is disappoint people who are asking too much of you. I disappeared for one night and came back with boundaries that saved my sanity. My sister's career was a casualty of her poor planning and unrealistic expectations, not my selfishness. And I would do it again tomorrow if I had to, because protecting yourself is never the wrong choice, even when everyone else disagrees.